$14,200 for the venue, $18,500 for catering, $6,800 for the florist, $4,200 for the photographer, $3,100 for the band, $2,400 for the cake, $28,800 in smaller line items, the kind most people forget about until the invoice arrives, chair rentals, lighting rigs, printed invitations on linen cardstock, dress alterations for bridesmaids who changed, and their measurements twice, a hotel block deposit for out-of-town guests, a shuttle service between the ceremony and reception, $78,000. I could list every vendor, every invoice number, every payment date, because my brain has always processed the world in quantities. Concrete in cubic yards, steel in tensile strength per square inch, love in dollars wired. And on that Friday night at the rehearsal dinner, I had paid for in the venue I had booked, surrounded by flowers from the florist I had chosen, the bride looked at me and said, "You don't belong here." Her name was Amber. She was about to become my sister-in-law. And she was right about one thing: I did not belong here. But the reasons were mine, not hers. I arrived at the venue 40 minutes before anyone else. Professional habit. When you spend your career assessing commercial structures, you walk a site before the crew shows up. You check the load paths, the exit clearances, the things that hold weight, and the things that only look like they do. The rehearsal venue was a converted textile mill in Noda, the kind of place Charlotte couples love because it photographs well, and the exposed brick makes everyone feel interesting. I had coordinated the layout with the event planner over 14 calls across 3 months. I checked the table configurations, the speaker placement, the aisle between the bar and the seating, the distance between the emergency exits and the nearest guest tables, everything measured to specification. My name was on every contract in the folder on my laptop, filed under Albright Thornton Wedding Master. 14 vendors, 14 agreements, every one signed by Corinne E. Albright. Every payment from my business account or personal checking. When the wedding party arrived, Amber passed me without eye contact. She was flanked by her bridesmaids, 5 women in matching silk robes Amber had ordered for the weekend and charged to the wedding account, which was my account. They moved through the venue like they were surveying a property they already owned. I watched them from the bar where I was reviewing the champagne setup with the caterer's assistant. Amber didn't ask about the champagne. She didn't ask about the appetizer timing or the vegetarian alternatives or the allergy accommodations I had negotiated over 3 separate calls with the catering director. She had never asked about the planning, the budget, the vendor negotiations, the $78,000. In 11 months of engagement, Amber's total contribution to the logistics of her own wedding was 1 email about napkin color, sage green. I still had the email. The seating chart was printed on a large foam board near the entrance. Names in calligraphy that cost $400. I found my name at the bottom, table 9. Back corner beside the speaker stack for the jazz trio, the seat with the worst sight line to the head table. Amber's sorority sisters and their dates. I walked to Trent. My brother stood near the head table, adjusting his cufflinks, his back to the room. He had our father's build broad across the shoulders, and our mother's tendency to avoid looking directly at a problem until it went away or someone else handled it. "Trent, I think there's a mistake with the seating." He glanced at the chart and then at his shoes. Amber reworked the chart. "It's just for tonight. Can we not do this right now? I'm at a table with strangers. By the speaker stack. They're not strangers, they're her friends. Just be flexible. Please. Flexible." The word landed with the precision of a hammer on a stress fracture. I had been flexible when Amber changed the florist 3 weeks before the deadline, costing an additional $2,200 in rush fees. I had been flexible when she upgraded the catering package from the silver to the gold tier without consulting me, adding $9,000 to the final invoice. I had been flexible at Thanksgiving when she seated me at the far end of the table and told Trent's college friends I was a family friend who's very generous. I had been flexible for 3 years, absorbing her comments, her exclusions, her careful and systematic construction of rooms where I did not fit. And Trent's answer every single time was the same word delivered in the same soft, deflecting voice. Flexible. I sat at table 9. The speaker stack hummed 2 feet from my left ear, a low electrical buzz that would intensify when the trio started their second set. A woman with beach wave hair and a silver cocktail dress asked what I did. "I'm an engineer," she tilted her head. "Like computers, structures. I assess commercial buildings and make sure they don't fall down." She laughed politely and returned to her phone where she was posting an Instagram story of the venue's Edison bulbs. Another woman, younger with an engagement ring of her own, asked if I was a friend of Trent's. "I'm his sister," I said. The woman's eyebrows lifted. "Oh, I didn't even know he had a sister. Amber never mentioned you." She said it cheerfully as though it were a charming piece of trivia, and not a sentence that contained the entire architecture of my relationship with this family. The jazz trio I booked played something slow and liquid, a Cole Porter arrangement I had specifically requested because Trent used to hum Cole Porter songs in the car when we were teenagers. My phone buzzed with a vendor confirmation for the Saturday flower delivery. I swiped it away. The braised short rib arrived at the table plated on white porcelain with a rosemary sprig and a red wine reduction. $68 per plate, and I could taste the rosemary glaze I had selected from the tasting menu back in January, sitting in the caterer's office with my project planner open and Amber absent because she had a conference in Raleigh. I ate 3 bites. The champagne in my glass had gone flat while I waited for someone to talk to me. From my seat, I could see the head table through the gaps between the speaker stack and a decorative pillar. Trent sat beside Amber. His arm rested on the back of her chair, his fingers grazing her shoulder. He was laughing at something her maid of honor said, his head tilted back, his eyes crinkling at the corners the way they used to when I did the Hagrid voice. He did not look in my direction. I counted the guests visible from my angle. 62 seated across 8 tables of 8 plus the head table of 6. At $297 per person for dinner alone, I was funding $18,414 worth of people having a wonderful time. Add the venue, the alcohol, the flowers, the entertainment, and this single evening had cost me approximately $31,000. My steel beam pendant sat against my collarbone, warm from my skin. I touched it with 2 fingers, pressing the small piece of commemorative structural steel against my sternum. The Uptown Charlotte parking garage, 10 stories designed for a live load of 50 pounds per square foot, plus a 20% safety margin. My first completed project. My team was 3 people then, working out of a rented office above a print shop on South Boulevard. I kept the pendant because it proved I could build something from nothing. Nobody from my family came to the ribbon cutting. Trent had a football game. Glenn said he'd try. He didn't try. Then Amber approached my table. Her smile was performance grade, the kind she activated for photographs and vendor meetings, and the moments when witnesses were present. She placed her hand on the back of my chair, leaning in like a friend sharing a secret. "Corinne, I just want tonight to feel right. You know, it's Trent's night, and I think you'd be more comfortable not at the head table. I know big events aren't really your thing." I coordinated the event planner, Amber. "I booked this venue." The smile dropped. Her hand left the chair. Her voice went low enough that only I could hear the vowels sharp and clean, the voice she used when no one was taking photographs. "That's exactly what I mean. You've done your part, financially, but this is family now. And you don't belong here. Not at this table." She held my gaze for 3 seconds. I counted them. Then the smile returned, as sudden and practiced as a stage light, and she squeezed my shoulder like we had just shared a warm exchange about centerpiece colors. She walked back to the head table where my brother put his arm around her and kissed her temple. I stood up from table 9. My phone, my clutch, my jacket. Nobody at the table noticed. The woman who didn't know Trent had a sister was posting her 3rd Instagram story. I walked through the venue toward the back exit, past the exposed brick, and the Edison bulbs, and the gardenias Amber had chosen, because they were the least expensive option from the florist I hired. The jazz trio played the bridge of Night and Day. Glasses clinked. 62 guests enjoying an evening I had built from the first phone call to the last invoice, and the structure had just been condemned by the person who contributed nothing but the napkin color. The parking lot was warm. Late June in Charlotte, the asphalt still radiating the day's heat like a thermal mass wall. Cicadas pulsed in the magnolias along the fence line, their rhythm steady and mechanical, keeping time when humans cannot. The string lights from the venue cast long amber lines across the pavement. I heard laughter through the glass doors, muted communal belonging to everyone inside, and to nobody standing out here in the parking lot with her car keys in her hand. My key fob beeped. The car unlocked. I was opening the driver's door when I heard Trent behind me. "Corinne, wait. Come on. Don't leave like this." I turned. He stood 10 feet away, his suit jacket open, his phone in one hand. His posture was familiar, the stance of a man facing something uncomfortable, soft, hesitant, already searching for the route that required the least friction. She told me, "I don't belong here, Trent. She's stressed. Wedding stress. You know how she gets." "I know how she gets. I've known for 3 years. The question is whether you know." He ran his hand through his hair, a gesture our father made when the bills were overdue and nobody was supposed to mention it. "What do you want me to do? Tell my bride the night before our wedding that she's wrong. I want you to tell her the truth. That I paid for every tablecloth, every glass of champagne, every note that band is playing in there. And she seated me with strangers and told me I don't belong. Corinne, please. Say something, Trent. One honest sentence." He stood there. The cicadas filled the space between us with their indifferent rhythm. 10 seconds, 20. His phone buzzed against his palm. He glanced at the screen. "Our mother." He silenced it, pressing the side button without lifting the phone to his ear. I watched him silence our mother the same way he had silenced every uncomfortable truth for the past decade, with one thumb and no eye contact. "Can we just get through this weekend?" I looked at my brother. I calculated 30 years of putting quarters into this relationship, and I use the word relationship instead of family because family implies reciprocity, and this was a one-directional load. Driving him to school when our parents worked doubles at the textile distribution center. Paying his community college tuition with money from my first engineering salary, $1,200 a semester. 4 semesters, $4,800. I never mentioned again. Co-signing his apartment lease when no landlord in Charlotte would approve his credit score. Helping him prep for the project management certification exam over 6 Sunday phone calls. Writing the check for this wedding before he finished asking because his voice cracked, and that crack carried more weight than any structural calculation I have ever performed. 30 years. And his return was 6 words, "Can we just get through this weekend?" I got in the car. He said my name once more with the inflection of a man who has already lost the authority to use that word. I closed the door, started the engine, and pulled out of the parking lot. The string lights shrank in my rearview mirror until they were indistinguishable from the fireflies along the tree line. Back at the hotel, I sat on the bed with my shoes still on. The room was generic identically, so to every hotel room I had ever occupied: beige walls, polyester comforter with a pattern nobody chose, the mechanical hum of an air conditioning unit that smelled faintly of someone else's perfume. My laptop was on the desk. I stared at it for 11 minutes. I timed myself because timing is what I do. 11 minutes of sitting with my heels digging into the carpet, weighing a decision that every load test in my engineering career had prepared me for. I opened the laptop. The vendor receipts folder icon sat on the desktop, the same icon I used for every project file, because this had been a project. Albright Thornton Wedding Master. I opened it. 14 contracts. I read them one by one the way I read structural reports, starting with the summary terms, then the scope of work, then the cancellation and termination provisions. Every contract followed standard commercial form. Service agreement between Corinne E. Albright, hereinafter referred to as client, and the vendor entity. Scope of services. Payment schedule. Liability limitations. Cancellation clause with notice period and fee schedule. In 14 documents, the name Trent Albright appeared 0 times. The name Amber Thornton appeared 0 times. The name Albright Thornton appeared only in the project reference line, a description of the event, not a designation of a contracting party. In the eyes of North Carolina contract law, this wedding had one client, the person who signed, the person who paid, the person who could terminate. Me. I opened the cancellation provisions one by one and built a spreadsheet. The venue required 48 hours written notice with a 25% termination fee. The caterer required 72 hours with 30%, though the 72-hour window had technically passed, and I noted that the agreement included a force majeure carve-out and a discretionary waiver at the pot of 5. Vendor's option. The florist required 24 hours and full payment for product already ordered and prepared. The photographer, band, cake decorator, chair rental company, lighting subcontractor, shuttle service, invitation printer, each with their own clause, their own notice period, their own fee structure. I entered each line into the spreadsheet. Column A, vendor name. Column B, contract number. Column C, cancellation clause reference. Column D, notice period. Column E, estimated fee. Column F, payment method. Total estimated cancellation cost $23,200 on top of the $78,000 already paid, $101,200. I sat with that number the way I sit with a soil report that reveals unexpected load-bearing weakness. Not with panic, but with the engineer's question, what does this number change and what does it not? My firm had weathered a $40,000 project overrun last year when a subcontractor underestimated the rebar quantities for a parking deck expansion. We absorbed it without missing payroll. $101,000 was larger, but the firm's annual revenue was $2.1 million, and my personal savings had the emergency fund I'd maintained since I was 24, the year the math made clear that nobody was coming to save me and I had better save myself. I called Dell at 11 o'clock. Delphine Marchetti, commercial real estate broker, 48, divorced the woman who had taken a meeting with a 26-year-old engineer, pitching her first solo structural assessment, and said, "Your numbers are sound, and your handshake needs work. I'll fix both." 7 years later, Dell was still fixing things. "It's 11 o'clock, Corinne. I need you to look at something. Is someone in the hospital? The bride told me I don't belong at the wedding I paid for." A pause. The sound of Dell sitting up in bed, the creak of a wooden headboard, the click of a bedside lamp, a glass of water being moved. Then, "Send me the contracts." I emailed the folder. She opened it while we stayed on the phone, her screen brightness audible in the background, the soft, digital chime of a document downloading on her tablet. She was quiet for 4 minutes reading. With the same precision she applied to commercial lease agreements, line by line, clause by clause, her breath steady and her attention total. "Corinne, honey, your name is on every single line. Venue catering, florist, photographer, entertainment, cake rentals, lighting shuttle service invitations, 14 contracts. You're not a guarantor, you're not a co-signer, you're the client." "I know. North Carolina contract law is clear on this. The contracting party has full right to terminate per the terms of each agreement. Trent and Amber aren't even third-party beneficiaries in the legal sense. They're named nowhere. They're guests at an event you're hosting on your dime." "I know that too. Then why did you call me?" "Because I need someone to tell me I'm not crazy." "You're not crazy. You paid for the scaffolding, and they told you not to stand on it. That's not a wedding, Corinne. That's a shakedown." Dell walked me through procedure. Written notice to each vendor per the specific termination language in each contract. Payment of all applicable cancellation fees within the time frame specified, wire transfer preferred to ensure same-day clearance. Documentation of every communication saved in the project folder, alongside the original contracts. She reviewed 3 of my notice drafts and tightened the clause references, because Dell does not leave gaps in paperwork the way some people do not leave dishes in the sink. "One more thing," she said. "When this is done, you come to the lake house. The guest room has clean sheets and the fridge has wine. I might need that. You will need that. And the dock has chairs. Take the chairs." I did not sleep that night. At 6:30 on Saturday morning, I sat on the hotel bed in the clothes I had traveled in the weak June light, pressing through the curtains and falling in narrow bands across the carpet. The in-room Keurig produced coffee that tasted like it had been brewed through industrial carpet, but I drank 2 cups because I needed my hands warm and my voice steady. I began with the venue. Patricia, the venue manager, answered with the bright efficiency of a woman accustomed to Saturday morning crises involving seating charts and dietary restrictions, not contract terminations. Miss Albright, good morning. Is everything set for this afternoon, Patricia? I'm calling to exercise the termination clause in Section 7.2 of our service agreement contract number VEN 2026031. I'll wire the 25% fee within the hour. I'm sorry, could you repeat that I'm terminating the contract, per the clause we both signed? The fee will be in your account by 8 a.m. Silence on the line. The silence of a professional recalculating. Miss Albright, are you sure the wedding is at 4 this afternoon? I'm exercising my contractual right to terminate. I appreciate your work, and I understand the inconvenience. The fee covers it. Understood. I'll process the cancellation and confirm by email. I move to the caterer. Same pattern adapted for each contract-specific language. Contract number. Clause reference. Fee offered. The catering director asked if the couple was aware. The contract is between you and me, I said. The couple is not a party to this agreement. The florist hesitated the longest because the gardenias had been arranged since 5 a.m. and were already loaded into the delivery van, the arrangements sitting in water trays in the back of a refrigerated truck parked outside the shop on East Boulevard. I paid for the arranged product, the delivery logistics, and the cancellation fee, 3 separate line items. The florist's assistant offered to deliver the flowers to a different address. I told her to donate them. The photographer asked twice if I was certain. I was certain both times. The band's manager was businesslike, required only the contract number and a verbal confirmation, and wished me well. The cake decorator, a woman named Helen who had custom designed a 4-tier vanilla buttercream with handmade sugar flowers, offered to refund the deposit to the original payment method. I told her to keep it. She had done beautiful work. The work was not the problem. Then the shuttle service, the lighting contractor, the chair rental company, the invitation printer, though, that contract was already fulfilled and required only a formal closeout notice. 14 calls. 93 minutes. Each call followed the same structure, because I am a person who follows structure, and the structure protected me from the thing that lived underneath the structure, which was grief. When the last vendor confirmed cancellation by email, I set my phone on the nightstand beside the steel beam pendant and sat in the silence. The hotel room hummed. The coffee cups were empty. The morning light had shifted from pale to gold. Outside, Charlotte was waking up to a Saturday in June, and 200 people were pressing suits and steaming dresses and checking the weather for an outdoor ceremony that would never happen. I packed my bag with the efficiency of someone who has learned to leave quickly. Toiletries charger, the clothes I wore to the rehearsal dinner, folded into the side compartment where I would not have to see them. I checked out at the front desk. The lobby was filling with wedding guests, early arrivals with fresh haircuts and garment bags, Amber's cousins in floral dresses, Trent's college friends in suits that fit better than they expected. A woman I recognized from the seating chart table, for Amber's aunt, adjusting a corsage pin with the focused attention of someone who believes the details matter. Nobody looked at me. I was another guest checking out early, unremarkable, invisible. I had been invisible in this family for 33 years. Today, the invisibility was structural. In the parking lot, I sent Trent one text, "I love you, but I won't pay to be humiliated." I watched my phone for 2 minutes. The screen stayed dark. I set it face down on the passenger seat and pulled onto the highway. The driving was supposed to bring satisfaction. I expected it with the certainty I bring to a building settling after the formwork is stripped. You pour the concrete, you wait for the cure time, you remove the temporary supports, and the structure either holds its own weight or it does not. I had poured and waited and stripped the supports. The structure should have settled into something clean and load-bearing. Instead, there was a weight behind my sternum that had nothing to do with engineering, and everything to do with a boy who laughed, until milk came out of his nose when I did the Hagrid voice. I helped Trent tie his shoes when he was 4, double knotting the laces because he would run through the house and the single knots always came undone. I packed his lunches for 3 years, When our mother picked up a second shift at the distribution center, turkey and cheese on wheat bread, with the crusts cut off a juice box, and a note that said something stupid like, "Have a good day, weirdo." I read him Harry Potter all 7 books, doing every voice, the Hagrid bass and the Dumbledore whisper, and the terrible Hermione pitch that made him howl. He was 11. I was 14. I drove him to his senior prom in a car I'd bought with summer internship money, a 2011 Honda Civic with a dent in the passenger door that I told him was a design feature. I stood in the back of his high school graduation because I'd driven 3 hours from NC State and the auditorium ran out of folding chairs. And when he called me 8 months ago, his voice cracking, saying their parents were tapped out from Glenn's early retirement and he couldn't afford the wedding Amber had designed, I said yes before he finished the sentence. $78,000. Because that is what the checkbook says when your mouth cannot say "I love you" loud enough to be heard over the noise of a family that forgot to listen. I drove north on Interstate 85 without a destination. Mile markers passed. The false victory sat in the passenger seat beside my silent phone, complete and absolute. Every vendor notified. Every contract terminated. At 4 o'clock this afternoon, Amber and Trent and 200 guests in formal wear would arrive at a venue with locked doors, an empty parking lot where a caterer's truck should be. No flowers, no photographer, no band, no cake, no evidence that a wedding had ever been planned for this space. And this day, the hours passed. I stopped for gas in Hillsboro and bought a bottle of water, and did not drink it. At 4:15, my phone lit up on the passenger seat. And lit up again, and again, 23 missed calls in 12 minutes. The names scrolled across the screen in frantic rotation: Amber, Trent, Glenn, Amber, an unknown number that repeated 3 times: Trent, Trent, Trent. The texts arrived in bursts, each one a detonation of characters I could read from the corner of my eye without lifting the phone. From Amber, "What did you do?" From Amber, 2 minutes later, "The venue is locked, are you serious right now?" From Amber, 90 seconds after that, "You psychopath. You absolute psychopath." From Trent, "Corinne, where are you?" From Trent, "The caterers aren't coming." From Trent, "There's nothing here, Corinne, there's nothing." From Glenn, "Your brother is standing in an empty parking lot on his wedding day. Call me." I gripped the steering wheel at 10 and 2. Highway markers passed on the right. 47, 48, 49. I counted them, because counting is what structural engineers do when the instruments are showing readings that exceed the design parameters, and the only option is to record the data and keep the system stable. The phone kept lighting up a sequence of small white flashes on the passenger seat, each one carrying a voice I was choosing not to hear. At 5 o'clock, I stopped at a gas station off the interstate and sat in the car with the engine off. I listened to one voicemail, Amber's voice vibrating between fury and something that sounded almost like fear. "You vindictive, pathetic, jealous woman. You couldn't stand watching your brother be happy with someone who isn't you. You ruined the most important day of our lives because you're so desperate for attention that you'd destroy a wedding to get it. Every single person here knows what you did, every single one, and when Trent hears what I'm going to tell him about you, he will never speak to you again. Do you hear me? Never." I deleted the voicemail. I started the engine. I pulled back onto the highway, heading north toward the lake house, toward the only person who had told me I was not crazy. Dell's Lake House was 2 hours north of Charlotte, on a small lake near the Virginia border. The house was cedar-sided, built into a wooded slope that ran down to the water, a structure built to settle into its landscape rather than sit on top of it. I arrived at 7:30 with the last pink light dying over the tree line. The wooden floors creaked under my suitcase wheels. The air smelled like dried pine and old books, and the kitchen still held the warmth of the afternoon sun that had come through the west-facing windows. I set my bag in the guest room and sat on the bed without unpacking my phone in my lap, the screen showing 41 missed calls and a text from Dell that said "Soup on the stove. Dock chairs are out. Don't answer anyone tonight." I did not listen. I answered one call. Glenn's voice came through with its familiar pattern of concealed anger, controlled on the surface with the tremors visible underneath a facade that could not bear the load it was designed to hide. "Corinne, your brother's wedding. His wedding. She told me I don't belong there, Dad. People say things they don't mean. You know that. She meant it. She has meant it for 3 years. So you cancel everything, $78,000 worth of everything, because of words, because of 15 years of words, and nobody saying anything back. His voice cracked. I had heard this exact crack once before, the night he called to tell me their pension was smaller than expected, and could I help with property taxes? And the sound of my father asking his daughter for money was the sound of a man whose pride was a structure he had built with his own hands. And I was watching it bow. He's your brother Corinne. He's sitting in a parking lot in a rented suit, and his bride is crying, and there is nothing here. How do I fix this? You don't fix this, Dad. I fixed it already. This isn't fixing. This is punishing. Those contracts were mine. My name, my money, my signature. I exercised my right to cancel them. If you want to talk about punishing, ask yourself about the woman who paid for a party she wasn't invited to. A silence. Long enough for the lake wind to push through the guest room window and move the curtains against the nightstand. Then quietly, with the precision of a man who has one weapon left and believes it will end the argument, your mother is crying. I'm aware of what that sounds like. I've heard it before. I hung up. I set the phone face down on the nightstand beside the pendant and stood. The guest room was clean and unfamiliar, and did not contain a single person who expected me to carry their weight. That absence was the first structural relief I had experienced in years. The dock was 20 steps from the back door. I walked barefoot. The wood was rough and cool under my feet. The planks slightly warped from years of lake moisture. Warped planks that held the impression of everyone who had walked them. The lake water was black and still in the darkness, reflecting the stars that were visible this far from the city. No light pollution, no string lights, no Edison bulbs pretending the darkness was something charming. I sat on the edge of the dock with my feet hanging over the water, and my hands pressed flat against the planks. The air was cool and smelled like cedar and wet stone, and the only sound was the water moving against the pilings, a slow, patient rhythm that had nothing to do with me. My shoulders dropped first. Then my chest contracted, a compression failure. What happens to a column when the load exceeds its design capacity, and the material cannot redistribute the stress? My hands pressed harder against the dock, and I leaned forward, the pendant swinging free from my collarbone, catching no light because there was no light to catch. My body stopped holding. The structural integrity that had carried me through the rehearsal dinner, the parking lot confrontation, the hotel room contracts, the 14 phone calls, the highway driving, the voicemails, Glenn's voice cracking about rented suits and crying brides, all of it exceeded the capacity of whatever load-bearing system I had been running for 33 years, and I folded. My forehead touched my knees. My breathing went shallow, and tight breathing for small spaces, for spaces not built for the person inside them. I had spent 33 years trying to be load-bearing for this family, absorbing their weight and distributing it into footings they could not see and had never once asked about, carrying the shifts and the tuition payments, and the co-signed leases, and the wedding invoices, and the property taxes, and the Thanksgiving travel, and the birthday presents that were never reciprocated, and the graduation attendance that was never returned. And when I asked for 1 square foot of floor space, 1 seat at 1 table in a room I had built from the first phone call to the last wire transfer, they told me the structure did not include me. The water lapped against the dock pilings. 1, 2, 3. I counted them, because I always count. Because counting is the last system that stays online when everything else is failing. I lifted my head. The pendant hung against my sternum, warm from my body heat, the only warm thing in the cool lake air. I reached behind my neck and unclasped it. I held it in my palm, a small piece of structural steel cut from the same batch that formed the primary support beams of a 10-story parking garage in uptown Charlotte. That garage is still standing. It was engineered to hold 10 times its expected load. It was built by a 25-year-old woman with 3 employees and a rented office, and nobody in the audience at the ribbon cutting. The question had never been whether this family deserved my money. The question was whether the family had ever been designed to include me. And the answer, sitting on a dock in the dark with lake water lapping at the pilings and a piece of steel in my palm, was that the answer had always been in the blueprints. I was the column, the footing, the unseen substructure beneath the visible building, useful, essential even, absolutely critical to the structural integrity of the whole operation. But the building above me was designed for other people. The rooms had other people's names on the doors. No amount of load bearing was going to add a room for me, because you can reinforce a column, but you cannot change a foundation that was poured without you in the plans. I clasped the pendant back on. I stood. The dock planks creaked under my weight, familiar with bearing load. I walked inside, locked the back door, and went to bed. Tomorrow I would build something different. Tonight I would let the structure rest. Sunday morning light came through the guest room window in pale bars that stretched across the quilt. Del's kitchen smelled like French press coffee, dark and bitter, and exactly right, brewed in a glass carafe that Del had owned since her own divorce when she rebuilt her kitchen one appliance at a time. I sat at her table, old oak, scarred with knife marks and ring stains, and the evidence of 100 meals eaten alone, and 100 more eaten with friends who stayed. Del set a mug in front of me and sat across the table with her own. "What are you going to do when Trent calls?" "He's already called. 47 times. I'm not answering." "That's not a plan, honey. That's avoidance wearing a blazer. The plan is I don't rebuild something that was never designed to hold me. And your brother, my brother, had 30 years to say one honest sentence in my defense. He chose the path of least resistance every time. I'm done being the load he refused to carry. You know that means losing him. Maybe permanently." I set my coffee down. The mug left a pale ring on the oak, joining the others. "I know." The morning passed in the quiet rhythm of two women who have both survived the slow grief of families that take more than they return. I wrote an email to Trent. 3 paragraphs composed with the same precision I use for project summaries. The first paragraph stated what happened, Amber's words at the rehearsal, Trent's non-response, the pattern across 3 years of dinners and holidays and family gatherings where I was seated at the margins, acknowledged for my money, and dismissed for everything else. The second paragraph stated what I did, contract cancellations per the terms of each agreement, cancellation fees paid, legal right exercised, no apology. The third paragraph stated what came next, I love you. That hasn't changed, but I will not pay for a family that doesn't include me. When you're ready to talk without Amber's script, you know where I am. I sent it at 1:14 p.m. I closed the laptop. The email moved through the internet at the speed of light, carrying the weight of 33 years at the speed that families process change, which is much slower. Del read the email over my shoulder before I sent it. She didn't suggest changes, which meant it was either perfect or so far past the point of editing that commentary was unnecessary. She poured me a second coffee and sat across the table, and we did something we had not done in 7 years of friendship. We sat in complete silence for 20 minutes, while the lake lapped against the dock pilings, and neither of us pretended the silence needed filling. At some point, Del said, "When I left Martin, his mother called me ungrateful. Said I was throwing away a good man over a misunderstanding. The misunderstanding was that Martin had a second family in Asheville." She sipped her coffee. "People who benefit from a system will always call you ungrateful for leaving it. That is not information about you, Corinne. That is information about the system." I nodded. Del went to the bookshelf and came back with a novel she'd been reading, and I went out to the dock and sat in a chair and watched the clouds move over the lake, slow and heavy and unconcerned with anything happening on the shore. Sunday evening, Del took a call from a business contact connected to the venue manager. Word moves through Charlotte's commercial real estate community like cracks through concrete, slowly at first, then everywhere at once. Del relayed the details over soup. The wedding party arrived at 3:30 on Saturday. The venue was locked. No staff, no setup, no tables, no chairs, no flowers, no food, no music. 200 guests in formal wear standing in a parking lot in the June heat, the women's heels sinking into the asphalt seams, the men loosening ties they had knotted 20 minutes earlier. Amber's mother, Loretta, called the venue's emergency line. The venue informed her that the contracting party had exercised the termination clause, and that their obligation was to Miss Albright, not the wedding party. Loretta demanded a manager. The manager repeated the same information. Glenn called the caterer and received the same answer, then the florist, same response. The photographer, the band, the cake decorator, one by one the same response. Miss Albright canceled. Miss Albright paid the termination fees. Their contracts were with Miss Albright. The wedding party had no legal standing to reinstate services. Amber told people you did it because you're jealous of her, Dell said, setting her spoon down. Told them you've always been obsessed with Trent and can't handle him loving someone else. She was on the phone with her mother in the parking lot loud enough for the remaining guests to hear, constructing a version of events where she was the victim and you were the villain. I stirred my soup, watching the steam curl in the lamplight. And, some of them believed her. The ones who don't know you. The ones from her side. But Trent's friend Jay, the one who was his roommate in college, he apparently turned to Glenn and said, "Corinne paid for all of this, the entire wedding." And Glenn said yes. And Jay said, "And nobody thought to put her at the family table." Glenn didn't have an answer for that. He never does. The venue manager told her staff that in 20 years of event management, she had never seen a client exercise a termination clause on the day of an event. She also said, "Your paperwork was the most organized she had ever processed." Her words were, "That woman runs a tight operation." Despite everything, I almost smiled. Almost. I did not ask for more details. The building had come down. I did not need to walk through the debris field and inventory the pieces. Monday morning brought rain, the kind that comes off the mountains in slow sheets and turns the lake's surface into textured glass. The guest room windows were cracked open, and the air carried the smell of wet leaves and the mineral sharpness of lake water stirred by the wind. My phone showed one new voicemail from Trent, timestamp 2:47 a.m. I sat on the edge of the guest bed. I pressed play. His voice came through rough and stripped the voice of a man who had been crying and stopped and started again multiple times, like concrete that cracks and heals and cracks in a different place when the load shifts. He paused between sentences, as though the words were heavy objects he was carrying across a room. "Corinne the First. I've been sitting in the venue parking lot. Amber went to her mom's. Everyone's gone. I'm just sitting here, and I keep thinking about when you used to read me Harry Potter, and you'd do that voice for Hagrid that was terrible. A sound that might have been a laugh collapsing under its own weight. And I should have said something. At the rehearsal. When she said what she said. I should have said something years ago. I just didn't want to make it worse. I thought if I just kept things calm it would." A pause, 10 seconds of parking lot silence. The ambient hum of a man alone in his car at 3 in the morning with the engine off and the dashboard lights fading. I don't know what I thought. More silence. Then, she said, "You don't belong here." And I sat there. I just sat there, Corinne. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. I don't know how to fix this. I don't even know if you'll listen to this. But I'm sorry. End of voicemail. I played it once, then again. The Hagrid voice. I had forgotten about that. I was 14. Trent was 11. I made the voice deep and booming and ridiculous, and he laughed until milk came out of his nose at the kitchen table. And our mother told us both to clean it up. And we did, still laughing, his small shoulder pressed against mine as we wiped the table. I did not call back. I saved the voicemail. His apology was real. The weight in his voice was the weight of a man confronting a pattern he had spent 10 years calling patience and peacemaking and family management. But it was a voicemail at 3 in the morning from an empty parking lot delivered to a recording because the live version would have required him to say these words while looking at me. An apology delivered after the building has already collapsed, when the structural failure is visible and undeniable, and the only response left is to stand in the rubble and say, "I should have reinforced that column when I had the succeeded chance." True, and too late for the structure it was meant to support. Monday afternoon, I packed my bag. Dell hugged me at the front door, her arms firm and practical, the hug of a woman who has rebuilt her own life and knows what the packing stage looks like. You build things, Corinne. That's what you do. Go build something that's yours. I drove south on the interstate toward Charlotte. The skyline appeared over the trees, growing in the windshield like a structural model rendering on a screen layer by layer, beam by beam. Every commercial building I had assessed in the last 8 years was cataloged in my memory. The parking garage from my first project was visible from the highway, a concrete rectangle on the south side of Uptown, 10 stories reinforced, holding steady, after 7 years of daily load cycles and Carolina weather. The pendant caught the afternoon light through the windshield. I did not reach for it. I did not need to. I pulled into my parking spot at the firm at 3:12 p.m. The building was a renovated warehouse on South Tryon, 2 stories brick and steel, a structure I had assessed myself before signing the lease 6 years ago. The first floor housed the drafting room and the conference area. The second floor held my office and the server room. The office was warm and familiar. Blueprints on the wall arranged by project date, structural models on the shelf above the filing cabinets. The hum of 14 people working a Monday that had nothing to do with weddings or families or $78,000. My assistant Brianna waved from her desk without looking up from her screen, the casual wave of someone who assumed I had simply been away for a long weekend, which technically was true. The nameplate on my office door read what it had always read: Corinne E. Albright, P.E., Principal Engineer. I had ordered that nameplate the week I signed the lease. I remember running my finger over the engraved letters and pressing my thumbnail into the period after P.E., Professional Engineer, the credential I had earned at 26 after 4 years of university and 2 years of supervised practice and an 8-hour examination that tested whether I could be trusted with the safety of structures that other people would occupy. I had earned every letter on that nameplate. No one had given it to me. No one had funded it. No one had shown up to watch me receive it. I sat at my desk, my table. A bid request waited in my inbox. A new mixed-use development in South End, Charlotte. 12 stories, complex foundation work requiring soil analysis and load path engineering, and the precise calculation of how much weight a structure can hold before failure. The kind of project my firm had spent 8 years preparing for. I opened a new document and typed the header Albright Structural Engineering, Structural Assessment and Foundation Design Proposal. The pendant rested against my collarbone. The office was quiet. My coffee was hot. Outside the window, Charlotte was building. 3 months later, I was standing on the South End site in a hard hat and steel-toed boots reviewing foundation rebar placement with my project lead Caleb Trotter when my phone buzzed with a text from Trent. "Can we get coffee?" I stared at the screen for 8 seconds. Caleb asked about the concrete pour schedule for the east retaining wall, and I answered him with the part of my brain that runs on professional autopilot, while the rest of me processed 6 words from a brother who had not sent me a message. In 3 months. His last communication was the voicemail. Before that, the text from the parking lot. Before that, "Can we just get through this weekend?" A man who communicated in fragments because full sentences required a structural honesty he had never been taught to build. Thursday, noon, the diner on Tryon. He replied with a thumbs-up emoji, which contained exactly as much emotional content as I expected. Thursday came with a November sharpness that made Charlotte feel like a different city. The summer, humidity replaced by a sharpness that clarifies the skyline and turns every breath visible. The diner was 2 blocks from the construction site, a place where contractors and engineers ordered lunch without looking at the menu, a place that smelled like coffee and bacon grease at every hour of the day. I arrived first. Trent walked in at 12:04, thinner than the last time I saw him, the summer softness gone from his jawline. He wore a jacket I had not seen before, dark canvas, practical, something a man buys for himself when his wife is no longer choosing his clothes. He sat across from me and wrapped his hands around his coffee mug like he was holding something that might crack if he gripped it wrong. "Amber and I eloped," he said, watching my face. Courthouse ceremony. 2 weeks after. No reception. Her mom hosted a dinner at her house. 15 people. She paid for it herself. Good. The silence that settled between us was different from every silence we had shared before. The parking lot silence had been full of things unsaid. The phone silence had been full of avoidance. This silence was negotiated, careful. the silence of two people testing the weight a conversation can bear before something gives. "I'm not going to say you were wrong," Trent said. "And I'm not going to say you were right. I'm just going to say I miss you. I miss you too. Amber and I are working on things. A counselor. She's trying. I hope she is. She's not the person you think she is, Corinne. She's exactly the person she showed me, Trent. Every time we were in the same room, she showed me who she is. The question was never about Amber. The question was about whether you could see it." He wrapped his hands tighter around the mug. "I saw it. I just didn't know what to do about it. You could have said something. Once. Any of those times. I know. You could have said, 'She's my sister, and she belongs at this table.' 7 words. In 3 years, you could have said those 7 words once." He looked down. The diner noise filled the space between us, plates being bussed, the grill sizzling, a waitress calling an order. When he looked up, his eyes were the same brown as mine, the same shape, the same family, the same architecture with different load tolerances. "I'm here now," he said. "You are." He looked at my pendant. "You still wear that thing, always. I should have come to that ribbon cutting. I should have been there." I picked up my coffee and drank. The mug was heavy ceramic diner grade, the kind that can take a fall. I did not answer, because the sentence did not require an answer. It required 8 years to travel from the ribbon cutting to this booth, and the weight it carried now was different from the weight it would have carried then. Glenn had not spoken to me since the lake house phone call. He would come around or he would not. Foundations do not change overnight. But the week before, a card arrived at my office, no return address. My mother's handwriting on the envelope, the loops and dips of a generation that wrote by hand, because typing was for secretaries. Phyllis wrote, "I don't understand what happened, but I miss my daughter." 8 words. The first time my mother had reached out to me independently of my father. Small, structural, the way a hairline crack in a wall can be either the first sign of failure or the first sign that pressure is finding a new path. I walked Trent to the parking lot. The construction site was visible from the sidewalk, the steel framework of the first 4 stories rising against the November sky, a skeleton of beams and columns waiting for the concrete and glass and systems that would turn it into a building people could use. "Is that yours?" Trent asked. "My firm's. 12 stories. Structural assessment and foundation work." "That's a big building, Corinne. It's engineered to hold everything it needs to hold." He put his hands in his jacket pockets and stood there for a moment, looking at the steel going up. "I don't know how to fix what happened." "You don't need to fix it. You need to stop letting other people decide where your sister belongs." He nodded. He did not make a promise because he was smart enough to know that promises are lightweight and structural changes require engineering. I watched him walk to his car. He turned at the door, raised one hand. I raised mine back. Then I walked toward the construction site, where 12 stories of steel and concrete were being assembled to specifications I had written. The pendant caught the November light, steel against collarbone, warm from the heat of my own body. I had worn it for 8 years as a memento of the first structure I ever built. The meaning had shifted, redistributed like load paths when you add a floor. Same material, same steel, carrying a different kind of weight. The construction site smelled like concrete dust and cold metal, and the mineral sharpness of fresh concrete being poured. Caleb was calling measurements to the rebar crew in the East Quadrant, his voice carrying across the framework with the clarity of a man who trusts his numbers. I pulled out my blueprints and walked toward the east wall. There is a principle in structural engineering that most people outside the profession never learn. Every structure is designed to fail. The question is not whether the building will encounter loads beyond its design capacity. The question is how it fails, whether the failure is gradual and visible, giving occupants time and warning and the chance to respond, or whether it is sudden and catastrophic and silent until the moment the floor gives way. Good engineers design for graceful failure. They build systems that bend before they break, that deflect before they shatter, that send visible cracks along predictable paths, so the damage can be assessed and addressed before it becomes irreversible. I spent 33 years bearing load for a family that had never been designed to include me in the occupied space. I was the substructure, the footing, the reinforcement that no one sees when they walk into a building and admire the architecture. And when I asked to be included in the space above to sit at a table in a room I had funded, the system did exactly what poorly designed systems do. It rejected the element that was asking for something it was never configured to provide. Part of me still reaches for the checkbook. For Trent, for my parents, for the version of family that lived in the Hagrid voice and the turkey sandwiches and the double-knotted shoelaces. The checkbook was the easiest way to say, I love you, without having to hear whether they said it back. And that admission sits in my chest like a penny embedded in a foundation, poor, buried, and permanent, and too small to affect the structural integrity, but too present to pretend it is not there. Trent might keep showing up. The Thursday coffees might become a reliable pattern, a reliable load cycle, consistent enough that an engineer would factor it into a design. Or Amber might slowly reconstruct the version of events where I am the villain who destroyed a wedding over 4 words, and Trent might drift back to the path of least resistance because that path has always required less from him than the alternative. I do not know which way the load will shift. The question remains open like a foundation left open until the soil report confirms what the ground will hold. What I do know is this: I build structures that stand. I have spent my career engineering systems to carry weight, to distribute load across multiple paths, to endure the forces the world applies without warning or fairness. I spent 33 years applying that skill to a family that treated me like scaffolding useful during construction, essential to the process removed when the building was complete. Scaffolding comes down, the building remains. I am the building. The foundation pour was setting in the east quadrant, the concrete curing in the November air molecules interlocking into the matrix that would bear 12 stories of occupied space. Caleb called out that the east wall measurements were within tolerance. The sky was pale and sharp above the steel framework, and somewhere across Charlotte, my family was recalculating. I turned back to the blueprints. The pendant was warm against my skin,